I never thought a garden shed could start a war. It was just a 12 by 12 wooden structure behind my beige-sided house on Maple Crescent, a quiet cul-de-sac where people smiled on trash day and pretended they liked each other, until the HOA showed up. It began on a Tuesday morning when I found a yellow violation notice taped to my front door. In big red letters, unapproved construction, remove immediately or face daily fines. I actually laughed. I'd built the shed myself last spring, painted it to match the house, tucked it behind the fence, even planted flowers around it. It was neat, harmless, but to the Maple Creek HOA, apparently, it was a mortal sin. That evening, I walked down to the small brick office near the neighborhood entrance. Inside, a laminated sign read, HOA Office, Authorized Personnel Only. Behind the glass window sat Brenda Carson, the HOA president, a woman who smiled the way lawyers do right before they crush you. "Mr. Reed," she said without looking up from her laptop, "you've built an illegal structure on association property." "Association property?" I repeated. "That's my backyard." She slid a map across the counter, a blurry copy of a plat drawing. "Technically," she said, tapping with a manicured finger, "the corner of your shed extends 6 inches over the easement. That's HOA land, 6 inches. She said it like I'd invaded another country. "I can move the fence line," I offered. "Too late," she said, already printing something. "Board voted this morning. Structure must be removed within 10 days. Daily fine, $200. I stared at her. "You voted before even talking to me?" "Rules are rules." She handed me the paper with a triumphant little smirk, the kind that told me she enjoyed this part. As I stepped outside, sunlight hit the HOA sign, nailed above the door. Maple Creek Show, Community Pride Enforced. The word enforced felt heavier than it should. That night I sat in my shed, the air smelling of cedar and old tools, thinking. They wanted to demolish this place? Over 6 inches? I'd worked months of weekends on it. This shed wasn't just lumber, it was therapy after my divorce, after losing my dad. No way I was letting them tear it down. So I started digging, not physically, but digitally. Property records, zoning maps, tax databases. I'd built houses for a living. I knew where to look. And somewhere between sleepless coffee refills, I noticed something odd. The HOA office itself sat on a tiny rectangular lot that wasn't clearly labeled as HOA owned. It was leased from a holding company that hadn't filed an update in years. That's when an idea began to spark. 2 days later, a white HOA truck parked in front of my driveway. Brenda stepped out with 2 staff members in blue polo shirts, embroidered with HOA compliance. She had a clipboard and that same confident smirk. "Final inspection before removal," she said. I leaned against the porch railing. "You're early?" "We like to be thorough." I nodded toward the shed. "Take all the pictures you want." "It's not going anywhere." She raised an eyebrow. "Defying the order won't end well for you, Mr. Reed." I smiled back. Neither will underestimating me. That night, while the neighborhood slept, I called a friend of mine, a commercial realtor who owed me a favor. "Check ownership on parcel 87B, I said. He pulled the records and whistled. "That little lot by the sign? It's still in limbo. Technically for sale, probably a clerical slip. How much?" I asked. When he told me, I laughed quietly to myself. Cheaper than what the HOA had already fined me. The next morning, I stood on my porch sipping coffee when the mail truck pulled up. Inside the stack was another white envelope from the HOA. Final notice of demolition. They really weren't wasting time. I smiled, folded it neatly and set it on my counter beside a new folder labeled Parcel 87B, Purchase Agreement. I'd done it. 2 signatures, a wire transfer, and a quiet morning at the county recorder's office. And I officially owned the small rectangular piece of land beneath the Maple Creek HOA office. The irony was delicious. They wanted to tear down my shed for sitting 6 inches over a line. I now owned the ground under their entire operation. That afternoon, I walked casually into the HOA office again. Brenda was typing furiously, wearing her usual navy blue blazer with the HOA pin on the lapel. She didn't look up. "Here to appeal again?" she said, her tone sharp. "No," I said, setting a manila envelope on her desk. "Just bringing you some new paperwork." She frowned and opened it. Inside was a notarized notice of ownership transfer and a letter of lease termination. "What is this?" she demanded. "Eviction notice," I said simply. She blinked, confused. "I own this land now. You've been operating here without a legal lease for almost 6 years. County confirmed it this morning. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Effective immediately, I continued. You have 30 days to vacate or sign a new lease. With me. For a moment, the room went quiet except for the ticking of the cheap wall clock. The 2 staff members behind her exchanged glances. Then Brenda stood, red-faced. You can't just... You think you can buy land and bully the association? I met her glare. I think I can use the same rules you used on me. She slammed the papers onto the counter. You're bluffing. I slid a copy of the recorded deed toward her. My name, Michael Reed, printed in bold under owner of record. Her confidence faltered. You'll regret this, she hissed. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll still have my shed. That night, I could almost feel the neighborhood whispering. Word spread fast, faster than I expected. People texted, called, even came to my door pretending to check in. Turns out I wasn't the only one they'd bullied. HOA had fined an old veteran down the street for painting his fence too dark. They'd harassed a single mom over a kid's basketball hoop. They'd even tried to ban porch flags during summer. Now everyone wanted to know what I'd done. I didn't explain much, just smiled and said, sometimes you fight paper with paper. A week later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. I decided to attend. The conference room was full, homeowners sitting in folding chairs, some holding coffee, others holding quiet grudges. Brenda stood at the front beside a whiteboard with the words, urgent land issue, scrawled across it. When she saw me enter, her face tightened. This meeting is for members only, she said. I am a member, I replied. And your new landlord. Half the room chuckled. Even the treasurer, an older man named Carl, couldn't hide his grin. Brenda's voice cracked with anger. This man is trying to undermine our authority. He's exploiting a legal loophole. Carl raised a hand. If he owns the property, it's not a loophole, Brenda. It's ownership, the crowd murmured. People loved seeing power stumble. I kept my tone calm. Look, I'm not here to shut you down. But if you want to keep operating here, we'll need a fair lease. And maybe, I said, letting my words hang in the air, a new approach to how we treat residents. For the first time since this started, Brenda didn't have an answer. As I left that night, I saw my reflection in the glass door beneath the HOA sign. The same words, community pride enforced. But now they almost look different. Maybe pride didn't mean control anymore. Maybe it meant standing your ground. The next few days felt different. When I walked my dog, people who used to look away now waved. When I mowed the lawn, neighbors who once complained about noise hours gave me a thumbs up. Even Carl, the HOA treasurer, stopped by with coffee one morning and said quietly, You did what we've all wanted to do for years. It was subtle, but you could feel the air shifting in Maple Creek. Brenda's iron grip on the neighborhood was starting to crack, but power doesn't die quietly. On Friday afternoon, a new letter appeared in my mailbox, stamped Urgent Ho Notice. Inside was a 3-page document full of legal jargon accusing me of conflict of interest, interference with association operations, and harassment. I laughed out loud. Brenda was fighting back, not with reason, but with paperwork. She'd also ordered temporary security at the HOA office. 2 guys in reflective vests standing near the building like it was a military base. I watched from across the street as they taped new signs on the glass. No trespassing. Private association business. Private. On land I owned. That weekend, I decided to call a neighborhood meeting of my own. No HOA agendas, no printed fines, just people. We met on the cul-de-sac, folding chairs in a circle under the evening sun. Families came out with lemonade and paper plates. Even the old veteran, Mr. Collins, showed up with his walker. Look, I began, standing in the center. This isn't about revenge. It's about fairness. I'm not trying to kill the HOA, just change it. We all live here. We all deserve respect. Someone in the back shouted, You should be president. People laughed, clapped, and for the first time, it felt like a real community again. I didn't plan on running anything, but sometimes leadership chooses you. Monday morning, Brenda called an emergency board meeting again. This time she didn't invite me around, but Carl did. The boardroom felt tense when I walked in. Brenda glared, papers stacked high beside her. Mr. Reed, she began, you've caused chaos. The association's authority is being undermined. I sat calmly. Or maybe people are finally being heard. You're manipulating them. she snapped. This community needs structure, I smiled. Structure isn't the problem, Brenda. Abuse of it is. Carl cleared his throat. Actually, several members have requested a vote of no confidence in the current leadership. Her head snapped toward him. You can't be serious. He nodded slowly. We're very serious. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't rebellion. It was liberation. That night, the HOA Facebook page, usually filled with posts about lawn violations, exploded with messages. Screenshots of Brenda's threats, photos of her yelling at residents, stories of fines that never made sense. It was like the neighborhood had finally found its voice. And in every comment, I saw the same phrase over and over. Rules are rules, right, Brenda? 2 days later, I got a call from Carl. She's calling an emergency election, he said. She wants to prove the community still supports her. I chuckled. Perfect. Let her. He paused. You planning to run? I thought for a moment, looking out the window at my shed, sunlight hitting the wooden panels I'd built with my own hands. Yeah, I said. I think it's time. The HOA announced the election date within 24 hours. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, emails flooded inboxes, and Brenda's face was suddenly everywhere, on posters, signs, even banners hanging from the entrance gate. In bold letters, keep order, keep pride, re-elect Brenda Carson. Her campaign slogan might as well have been, keep control. I didn't plan to campaign. But then neighbors started showing up at my door, one after another. Michael, you have to run. You're the only one who stood up to her. She made me cry over a flower pot. Please take her down. By the end of the day, there was a petition on my kitchen table with more than 30 signatures. I didn't even start it, so I printed my own flyers, plain white paper, black ink, nothing fancy. For a fair Maple Creek, vote Michael Reed. I didn't need slogans. I had proof. Election day came fast. The community center was buzzing like a beehive, people signing in, whispering, watching each other. Brenda stood by the refreshment table, smiling that tight political smile, shaking hands like she was running for mayor. Her eyes found mine across the room, sharp, cold, confident. I smiled back, calm, controlled. When I stepped up to the mic for the candidate's speech portion, I could feel the tension in the air, years of frustration bottled up inside these walls. I took a breath. Most of you know me as the guy who wouldn't tear down his shed, I began, earning a few laughs. But this isn't about a shed. It's about what that fight showed me, that somewhere along the way, we stopped being neighbors and started being subjects. I glanced toward Brenda. The HOA isn't supposed to be a weapon. It's supposed to protect us, not control us. So I'm not asking for your loyalty. I'm asking for your trust that we can do better. Applause filled the room. Not loud, but real. Brenda walked to the mic next. Her voice was tight, brittle. This man has disrupted our order. He's mocked the rules that keep Maple Creek beautiful. If you let him win, you'll lose structure, and chaos will follow. She looked around for approval, but all she got were blank stares. The fear she used to control people wasn't working anymore. Voting lasted an hour. Ballots dropped into a clear acrylic box, simple slips marked with either name. Carl and 2 other volunteers counted them in front of everyone. Brenda stood stiff, arms crossed, lips pressed white. When Carl cleared his throat, the room went quiet. By a vote of 62 to 18, he said, the new HOA president is Michael Reed. The crowd erupted, not with cheering, but with relief. Like a storm had finally passed. Brenda didn't move for several seconds. Then she snatched her purse and stormed out, heels echoing on the tile floor outside the window. She tore one of her campaign posters off the wall before driving away. That night, I sat in my shed again, the shed that started it all, listening to crickets and the distant hum of cars. On the workbench sat the HOA binder, thick with rules and policies. I flipped through the pages slowly, then closed it. The rules weren't the problem. The people who abused them were. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office, my office now, with a coffee in hand. The same sunlight that once made me nervous now felt like victory. Carl greeted me with a grin. Welcome, Mr. President, I laughed. Let's make some changes. He pointed at the corner. And that shed, I smiled. It stays forever. Becoming HOA president felt strange. One day, I was the neighborhood troublemaker. The next, people were calling me sir and asking for permission to plant trees. Power has a funny way of changing how people look at you. But I promised myself I wouldn't become another Brenda. At first I kept it simple. I called it Operation Reset. No more hidden fines. No more threats taped to doors. If someone had an issue, we talked like humans. Within a month, Maple Creek looked peaceful. The lawns were still neat, but the tension was gone. Neighbors started having block parties again. Kids played basketball without fear of fines. The air just felt lighter. But peace doesn't last long when you've humiliated someone like Brenda Carson. 2 months later, I got a letter. Not from the HOA, but from her lawyer. It was long, full of legal noise, accusing me of defamation, unlawful eviction, and abuse of authority. I almost laughed. She was still fighting, just changing weapons. I called Carl over that evening. He read through the papers, eyebrows raised. She's grasping at straws, he said. There's nothing she can win on. You bought that land fair and square. I know, I said. But she's not trying to win. She's trying to rattle me. He nodded slowly. She might rattle the neighborhood, too. You've got to stay calm, Mike. But staying calm was harder than it used to be. Now, every time I sat in that HOA chair, the same seat she once ruled from, I felt the weight. Complaints came daily. One woman wanted her neighbor fined for parking too close to her mailbox. Another filed a report about unsanctioned holiday decor. Sometimes I caught myself starting to say, rules are rules, before stopping mid-sentence. It scared me how easy it was to slip into that tone. One afternoon, while checking community records, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a small clause buried deep in the HOA charter. It stated that the HOA's board president also held automatic authority over property maintenance funding for associated lots, meaning, indirectly, I had full control over the land Brenda's office used to stand on. That was when an idea crept into my mind. Not a cruel one, but poetic. I drafted a plan to demolish the old HOA office building, the same brick structure where she'd threatened to tear down my shed. It was small, outdated, and technically redundant now. We didn't need it anymore. We could relocate meetings to the community center. Still, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see it fall, to watch justice swing full circle. Another part whispered that revenge and justice weren't the same thing. That night I sat on my porch, watching the sunset melt over Maple Creek. My shed glowed gold in the last light. Brenda once tried to erase that little structure from this neighborhood, and now it stood as a symbol of everything she'd lost. But what if tearing down her building made me just like her? The next day I walked into the HOA board meeting with the demolition proposal in my hand. Everyone looked curious, even a little nervous. Carl spoke first. You sure you want to do this? I set the paper down slowly. No, I changed my mind. A few heads turned. I smiled faintly. We're not tearing anything down anymore. Let's turn the old office into a community library instead. Carl blinked, then grinned. A library? Yeah, I said. A place where people can learn the rules and use them the right way. That weekend, volunteers came out in droves. The same neighbors who once feared the HOA now painted walls, brought books, planted flowers outside the old office. Kids helped too, brushing bright blues and yellows onto the trim. By Sunday evening, the sign out front had changed. Maple Creek Community Center, built by the people. I stood back, hands in my pockets, and exhaled. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about rebuilding what fear had broken. Late that night, as I closed my shed door, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of the new sign, with a single message underneath. You got what you wanted. But this isn't over. No name, but I didn't need one. Brenda. The text message didn't surprise me, but it chilled me. I stared at it for a long minute under the porch light, the screen glowing in the dark. You got what you wanted, but this isn't over. Brenda had always been predictable, but she was also dangerous when cornered. And this time she wasn't just angry. She was humiliated. 2 weeks passed. The Maple Creek Community Center, our converted HOA office, had become the neighborhood's favorite new landmark. People dropped off used books, kids painted murals, and we even held weekend movie nights. Everything looked perfect on the surface, until the letters started again. This time, they weren't from the HOA. They were anonymous, typed, no return address. Just one-liners like, "Watch your back, President. We know what you did. You're next." I tried to ignore them, But they kept coming, every few days, always slid under my front door late at night. Carl thought it was some bitter old resident still loyal to Brenda. I wasn't so sure. One evening, after closing the community center, I noticed a car idling across the street, black SUV, tinted windows. I stepped closer, pretending to check my phone. The SUV pulled off slowly, its headlights dimmed. Coincidence? Maybe. But the next morning, I found my shed door wide open, lock snapped clean off. Nothing stolen, but all my tools were scattered across the floor like someone wanted to send a message. I knew that signature move. Brenda didn't steal. She intimidated. So I went to visit her. Her house was 2 neighborhoods over. A brick colonial she'd bought years ago before Maple Creek went up. When she opened the door, her eyes flicked with surprise, then tightened into that old sharp glare. "Michael," she said, pretending calm. "What a surprise. I got your message," I said. "Several, actually." She leaned against the doorway. "You must think very highly of yourself if you believe I still care enough to bother. You cared enough to try to sue me. That was business," she said coldly. "This is personal." Her words were deliberate. She wanted me to react, but I didn't. I just studied her. She looked different, tired, angry. Her pride had curdled into bitterness. "You should move on, Brenda," I said quietly. "The neighborhood already has," she smiled thinly. "We'll see." 2 nights later, someone spray-painted across the new community center wall. "Trader President." When I arrived, a few neighbors were already cleaning it, angry but silent. I helped them scrub the paint off, but my hands trembled the whole time. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was a war of nerves. That night, I set up a few of my own security cameras, motion sensors, night vision, the works. I wasn't going to let her scare me out of what I'd built. 3 days later, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Alert, motion detected, community center lot." I opened the live feed. The camera flickered, grainy, but I saw movement. 2 figures near the side door. One of them was definitely Brenda. The other was a man. Couldn't see his face. But he was carrying something. I called the police. By the time they arrived, the figures were gone, but they'd smashed the back window and poured something on the floor inside. Gasoline. If the cops hadn't come that minute, my community center, and maybe half the block, would have burned down. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was outside, shocked, furious, united. Brenda's name was on everyone's lips, and this time, nobody was defending her. By noon, police cars pulled up in front of her house. I watched from the end of the street as officers walked her out in handcuffs, her once perfect hair disheveled, her expression blank. It should have felt good. But it didn't, because as I watched her get into that car, I realized something. She'd spent years believing she was the HOA, and now, stripped of it, she had nothing left. She'd built her whole life around control, and when she lost it, she'd rather destroy everything than see someone else fix it. That night, I sat in my shed again. Same smell of cedar, same quiet hum of peace. Outside, the community center lights glowed softly. We'd almost lost everything, but somehow we survived. Carl texted me. "Glad it's over." I looked out at the stars and typed back, "Maybe not over." But justice echoed. The day after Brenda's arrest, the neighborhood felt like it had taken its first real breath in years. People smiled again. Kids rode bikes without glancing nervously toward the HOA office. Even the air felt lighter, like the constant tension that had hung over Maple Creek had finally lifted. But I didn't feel relieved. Not yet, because when you've been at war that long, peace doesn't feel real. It feels like silence before the next hit. The police found enough evidence in Brenda's house to make the case stick. Threat letters, spray paint cans, even a flash drive with photos of my home security feeds. She'd hacked the system weeks ago. That shook me, knowing she'd been watching my family while pretending to be gone. They charged her with arson attempt, harassment, and property damage. She was denied bail. The neighbors started calling her the HOA Pyro, a cruel nickname, but I didn't correct them. Maybe she'd finally learn what it felt like to be judged by everyone around her. 2 weeks later, I stood at the new community center's dedication ceremony. We'd rebuilt the wall she vandalized, and now it bore a mural. A massive oak tree spreading its branches across painted rooftops, with the words, "Community over control." When I looked around, I saw faces that had once been divided now laughing together. Families, elderly residents, even the ones who'd once voted against me. Carl handed me the mic. "Say something," he whispered. I stepped forward, the crowd's quiet focus on me. "I used to think the HOA was about rules," I said. "But now I know it's about people, about taking care of where we live and who we live next to." I looked around. We survived the worst kind of leadership, the kind that forgets empathy. Let's promise each other we never go back to that. Applause rose, honest and unforced. It felt like closure, but deep down, I still had that gnawing unease, because Brenda wasn't the only one who believed in control. She just embodied it. The system that created her still existed in hundreds of neighborhoods across the country. That night, I sat in my garage with the lights off, sipping coffee that had gone cold. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Enjoy your little victory, President." But someone has to keep you in check. No name. No traceable ID. I exhaled slowly, locked my screen, and stared out into the quiet cul-de-sac. A raccoon darted across the street. A sprinkler hissed. Everything looked normal. But I'd been here before, that calm before a storm. A few days later, the HOA regional supervisor called. Apparently, Brenda's brother, Richard Owens, had filed a petition to take over the Maple Creek HOA board as her acting representative. He claimed that since she was wrongfully arrested, her position was still valid pending appeal. I actually laughed when I heard it, but the supervisor didn't. "Legally, he has the right to petition for review," she said. "It'll go to a vote." Richard Owens. I remembered him, smug, polished, and arrogant. He'd shown up once during Brenda's presidency, walking around like he owned the place, bragging about his business degrees, the kind of man who thought every neighborhood was just another company to run. Carl came over that evening. "You think he's serious?" "I think he's worse than Brenda," I said. "He doesn't want control for pride. He wants it for money." Carl frowned. "So what now?" I looked at the mural through my window, the painted oak tree glowing under the streetlight. "Now," I said quietly, "we prepare for round 2, that night." As the streetlights flickered and the air thickened with the coming rain, I realized something. Justice wasn't a one-time event. It echoed, and sometimes it warned you that the fight wasn't over. It had just changed faces. The brothers' takeover. It started with a letter. A plain white envelope, taped to the HOA bulletin board early one morning. Notice of special meeting. Subject, petition for interim leadership review. Signed, Richard Owens, acting representative for Brenda Carson, former HOA president. I read it twice, the words sinking like cold metal. Brenda's brother. He'd really done it. By the next day, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. "He's coming to take over." Some thought he had a legal claim. Others didn't care. They just didn't want another Carson anywhere near Maple Creek. Still, curiosity wins over fear. The community center was packed the night of the vote. Richard Owens walked in like he was stepping onto a stage. Tall, silver hair slicked back, crisp navy suit. He had that corporate confidence, the kind that comes from never being told no. Behind him, 2 assistants in matching gray suits carried folders and laptops. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to conquer. When he reached the front, he smiled like a politician. "Good evening, residents of Maple Creek," he said, voice smooth as oil. "My sister's unfortunate circumstances have been exaggerated. She was a dedicated leader, misunderstood perhaps, but committed to order. I intend to restore that," a few people murmured. Carl folded his arms beside me. "This guy's unbelievable." I stepped up to the mic before Richard could keep talking. "Let's be clear," I said. "Your sister terrorized this community for years. She's facing felony charges. You don't get to walk in and rewrite that." Richard smiled thinly. "Mr. Daniels, isn't it? The man who's turned our HOA into a circus of leniency." "I turned it into a neighborhood," I shot back. "One where people don't live in fear." He nodded slowly, pretending to think. "Fear maintains order." "You'll learn that the hard way." The crowd erupted, voices clashing, arguments spilling across rows. Carl tried to calm them, but Richard thrived on chaos. He let it happen. Then he dropped the bomb. "I hold legal power of attorney for my sister," he said, raising a document. Under HOA Charter Section 12C, a suspended president's representative may call for a confidence vote against the acting board. He turned to the crowd. Let's put it to democracy, shall we? My stomach sank. It was technically valid, that old clause I'd never bothered to remove. Brenda had written it herself years ago, designed to protect her power. Now it was coming back like a ghost. For 2 days, Maple Creek was divided again. Half the residents believed in what we'd built: open meetings, transparency, community. The other half were swayed by Richard's charm. He promised efficiency, professional management, and property value protection. Those were the same words Brenda used to justify everything she'd done. Carl and I went door to door, explaining the truth. We showed people the photos from the vandalism case, the threats, the damage. But still, some didn't care. They wanted order. They wanted someone who looked in control. It made me realize something dark. People don't always choose justice. They choose what makes them feel safe, even if it's a lie. The night of the vote, the community center overflowed again. Neighbors filled the aisles. Some stood outside by the windows just to hear. Richard stood up first. "I won't take much of your time," he said smoothly. My sister's vision was never about punishment. It was about standards, something this place has lost under its current leadership. He gestured toward me. This man's community-first policy has led to violations, clutter, and chaos. Maple Creek deserves better. He sat down to polite applause. Then Carl nudged me. "Your turn." I walked up to the mic, hands steady but heart pounding. "Richard's right about one thing," I said. "We've changed. We're not afraid anymore." I looked around the room, making eye contact with the faces I'd fought for. When I took over, our HOA had more complaints than community events, more threats than conversations. People were scared to decorate their own porches. I paused, the silence thick. But that fear didn't raise property values. It broke trust. It broke families. Someone in the back shouted, "Yeah!" I nodded toward the mural behind me. Community over control. That's what we built here. A place that belongs to its people, not to one family's obsession with power. The applause this time was louder, real. The votes were cast on paper slips, dropped into a clear plastic box. Carl tallied them while the room buzzed with tension. Richard leaned back, confident. I could see it in his smirk. He thought he'd already won. Finally, Carl looked up and cleared his throat. "By a vote of 87 to 62, he said, "the current board remains in place." The room exploded in cheers. Someone shouted, "Go home, Richard." His smile vanished, jaw tightening. He collected his folders in silence, but before he left, he turned to me. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You can't bury a Carson legacy that easily." As his car disappeared into the night, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all week. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. Legacy. It wasn't about the HOA anymore. It was personal. That night, as I locked my shed, I saw headlights pause at the end of my street, then disappear. No plates visible. And that same unease crept back, that echo I couldn't ignore. The silence after Richard left didn't last long. Maple Creek was peaceful for maybe a week, then the whispers started again. Someone spray-painted "Bring Back Order" on the community fence. 2 residents reported getting letters threatening mandatory inspections, and late one night, Carl's truck tires were slashed right in front of his house. It felt too familiar. Same tactics, same message. Only this time, Brenda was behind bars, or at least she was supposed to be. I called the county jail the next morning, pretending to be her attorney's assistant. They confirmed she was still inside, but they also said she'd been receiving frequent visitor meetings with her brother. Almost daily, so that was it. Brenda was running things again, from a cell. Richard was just her messenger. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. The mural across the street, "Community over control," looked like a taunt. How do you fight someone who never runs out of ways to reach you? That night, Carl came over, pacing my garage. "This isn't just vandalism," he said. "They're testing you, trying to see if you'll crack." I nodded. "They want me angry. They want me to act like them." He stopped. "What if they're not just testing you? What if they're building a case?" I frowned. "A case?" "Yeah," Carl said. "They could be setting you up, planting evidence, making you look like the problem." I wanted to laugh it off, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The slashed tires, the letters, the graffiti, all targeting me and my supporters. If someone spun it right, it could look like I was losing control, and that's exactly what Richard needed to call for another vote. 3 days later, a code enforcement inspector showed up at my door. "Anonymous complaint," he said. "Possible violation. Unregistered structure in the backyard." My stomach sank. He was talking about the shed. The shed, the one Brenda had once tried to tear down. I followed him outside. He pointed at the corner where the wood was slightly weathered. "If this wasn't on your original property permit, it could be non-compliant." I clenched my jaw. "It's been here for years. Everyone knows that," he shrugged. "Just following up on a report, sir. I knew exactly who made that report." That evening, I went through my emails. Sure enough, a message from HOA Legal Advisory Services had landed in my inbox. Subject line: Notice of Structural Review. Possible violation of Covenant 3B. Attached, a scanned copy of my own backyard. Taken from an elevated angle. Someone had used a drone. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to intimidate me. They were documenting, building a paper trail. If they could get my shed labeled a violation, they could claim leadership inconsistency and force a disciplinary review. I called Carl again. "They're coming for the shed," I said. He was silent for a moment. "Then maybe it's time you go on offense." "How?" "Prove they're abusing the system. Show everyone the truth in daylight." He was right. If Brenda and Richard wanted to use the HOA playbook, I'd rewrite it. Again. 2 days later, I called an emergency open meeting. Every homeowner was invited. No closed doors. No surprises. By noon, the community center was packed. Even the local paper sent someone. Word had spread fast that the HOA president was being investigated. Richard showed up, smirking in the back row. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man watching a trap close. I stepped up to the mic. "Before we start," I said, "I want to read something." I held up a printed copy of the email. "This notice was sent to me anonymously, claiming my shed violates Covenant 3B. But this photo," I lifted another sheet, showing the drone image, "was taken illegally over private property. That's not enforcement, that's invasion." A few gasps rippled through the room, and for those wondering, I continued, "This shed was approved by the HOA itself in 2016, signed by then-President Brenda Carson." Murmurs spread, heads turning toward Richard. He stood up, forcing a smile. "That's not the point." "Oh, I think it is," I said. "Because this is exactly what's wrong with the old HOA system. Intimidation, manipulation, spying. And we said we were done with that." Carl handed me the next sheet, a printed chain of emails I'd uncovered the night before. They showed correspondence between Richard's assistants and a private security firm, the ones who operated the drone. I handed the papers to the newspaper reporter sitting in the front row. "Public record now," I said. The room went dead silent. Richard's composure cracked. "You'll regret this," he hissed, stepping closer. "Maybe," I said calmly. "But I won't regret standing up to your family again." The audience broke into applause, louder than any meeting before. Someone shouted, "Get out of here, Owens!" He stormed out, red-faced, muttering something about lawyers. That night I sat on the porch as the sun set behind the rooftops. The street was quiet again, peaceful even, but I'd learned my lesson long ago. Peace in Maple Creek never lasted. Still, I smiled a little. Because for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was defending myself. I was defending the idea of the neighborhood, the version we'd all fought to build. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed. A new text. "No number. You can win votes, Mike, but you can't kill a legacy." I stared at the screen, heart heavy but steady. Then I typed back 3 words. "Watch me try." When you fight long enough, you start to forget what peace sounds like. Even quiet starts to feel like someone's watching. The morning after that last meeting, I woke up to the sound of sirens. They were heading toward the north entrance of Maple Creek. Fast. Carl called before I even got outside. "Mike," he said, breathless, "you better come down here." The HOA office, the old one, was on fire. Again. Flames climbed through the windows, curling black smoke into the sky. Firefighters were already there, shouting, dragging hoses, neighbors gathering in their pajamas. It wasn't as bad as before, but the symbolism hit like a punch to the chest. That building had become a community library, our symbol of change. and someone wanted it gone. Richard Owen's car was parked across the street. He stood there, hands in his pockets, pretending to watch like everyone else. When he noticed me, he smirked. "Tragic," he said. "Looks like your leadership didn't protect the town after all." I stared at him. "You did this?" He shrugged. "You'll never prove it. The fire chief said it looked like arson again, accelerant traces near the back door. Same pattern, same method. The police detained Richard for questioning, but he played it cool, calm, untouchable. He knew the system, just like his sister." I stood there in the smoke, watching the building crumble, and something inside me broke. Not out of anger this time, but exhaustion. For years, this fight had eaten away at everything else in my life, my sleep, my time, even my sense of safety. But standing there, watching that final piece burn, I realized something. They weren't trying to destroy me. They were trying to make me forget why I started fighting in the first place. 2 days later, the police found what they needed. A gas receipt, security camera footage from a convenience store half a mile away, Richard's car, 3 a.m., a red gas can in his hand. That was it. Arrest warrant issued. The Carson legacy finally burned out. I was sitting in my living room when the news alert hit my phone. Richard Owens, brother of convicted former HOA president, arrested for arson and conspiracy. I didn't cheer. Didn't even smile. I just exhaled. Because after everything, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. A week later, I walked to the ruins of the old community library. The air still smelled faintly of smoke. Charred bricks, melted frames, ash where the mural used to be. I bent down and brushed the dust from a half-burnt wooden plank, the only piece left with faded paint. It read, "Community over control." I took it home, hung it inside my shed. That shed, the same one Brenda tried to destroy, now stood as the last original structure in Maple Creek. Everything else had been rebuilt, changed, renewed. But that shed, it had survived every storm, and somehow so had I. At the next HOA meeting, I announced something unexpected. "I'm stepping down as president." The room went quiet. Carl blinked. "You sure about that?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's time. This place doesn't need me to fight anymore. It just needs to grow." A few people looked sad, others surprised, but mostly they understood. We'd won the war. It was time to move on. As the meeting ended, a neighbor's little girl ran up to me. She was maybe 8, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "It's for you," she said shyly. I unfolded it. A drawing, my shed, the community center, the mural tree, and in a child's handwriting at the bottom, "Thank you for saving our home." I had to look away for a second. That night I sat alone on my porch, lights off, stars above. The neighborhood was calm. No angry letters, no threats, no smoke, just peace, the kind that doesn't need to be earned anymore. My phone buzzed. Unknown number again. I opened it slowly. "It's over. You did what we couldn't. Maybe you weren't the enemy after all." No name, but I recognized the tone. Brenda. She'd finally stopped fighting. I set the phone down and looked toward the shed, my quiet monument. The echo of justice had finally faded, not because I'd silenced it, but because it had finally been heard, and for the first time in years, I slept easy.